less than 24 hours after this dramatic, emphatic win by Trump in this election cycle. And we're learning more. And one of the big questions being asked by a lot of people is now about the criminal cases involving the former president Donald Trump, as there are now reports that special counsel Jack Smith will wind down those Trump prosecutions. I do want to bring up this tweet here from Lindsey Graham, the senator out of South Carolina, discussing this, saying to Jack Smith and your team, it's time to look forward to a new chapter in your legal careers as these politically motivated charges against Trump hit a wall. The Supreme Court substantially rejected what you were trying to do. All right, let's learn more about what this means moving forward, how quickly they could wind down, because we're also learning so much about different indictments, of course, the one in New York, as well on the state level. Let's bring in former federal prosecutor Neama Rahmani. Neama, thank you so much for joining us here on Live Now from Fox. As those reports come out that special counsel Jack Smith will pull back, will not really seek some of these, is it as simple as poof, these prosecutions are gone?
Pretty much, Andy. Now that Donald Trump has won and won convincingly, a sitting president can't be prosecuted, so his criminal problems go away. Jack Smith should absolutely dismiss both the D.C. election fraud case and abandon his 11th Circuit appeal in the Florida classified documents case. The Justice Department has for almost 50 years had longstanding precedent that a president can't be prosecuted federally. And I think the same logic would certainly apply to the Fulton County State case as well. We'll see if Fani Willis follows that guidance. But if Jack Smith doesn't dismiss the case, the defense will file a motion to dismiss the cases. That motion should be granted. And of course, if for some reason they're not granted, Donald Trump takes office in January, he can easily direct his new attorney general to fire Jack Smith.
All right, that is very good. And of course, you mentioned that because it was 2 weeks ago that Trump said if he was elected, he would fire special counsel Jack Smith, quote, within 2 seconds of taking office. He may not get that chance, though, right?
I expect that Smith will dismiss the cases and resign well before Donald Trump takes office. I mean, there's really nothing for him to do in terms of these prosecutions right now. So his work will be done. Really kind of the only question lingering is, was his appointment unconstitutional? We know that Judge Eileen Cannon there in South Florida said that it violated the appropriations and appointments clauses of the Constitution. Maybe makes sense for the 11th Circuit to weigh in on that, just to answer that legal question. But as far as Donald Trump is concerned, he absolutely cannot and should not be prosecuted by Jack Smith at this point.
All right, that's a very good, interesting note. I just wanted to get clarification on it. But I do also want to ask you, because Jack Smith could have seen this coming because he was in a very, very tight race for him. Is this something that Jack Smith potentially prepared for?
I think he did, but he should have prepared better. And the question I have for Jack Smith and Fani Willis is, why did you wait so long to prosecute these cases? I think they anticipated that they would get to trial much sooner. Donald Trump's defense team did a masterful job, both strategically and tactically, delaying these cases. A lot of this evidence was out after the January 6th committee. So the question I have is, was this really a botched prosecution? Did it have any chance of success? Obviously, we know that the American people politically have spoken. I don't think they wanted to hold Donald Trump accountable for what happened on January 6th in the Capitol riots, and certainly not for the classified documents, the alleged mishandling. But if you do want to try a case like this, and you know that someone is running for office and there's the real chance that they get reelected in a few years, this is something that you should have anticipated and handled differently. So I think it was prosecuted poorly by Jack Smith, but especially by Fani Willis, who was nowhere near trial. She, of course, charged 19 co-defendants, hired her boyfriend, Nathan Wade. That case is up on appeal in the Georgia courts, and I do think that case should also be dismissed.
And you noted the most obvious criticism, the time it took to move these cases through the legal system. Is that the only criticism? Is that the biggest? Can you dissect that a little bit more?
Well, this is the whole political component. Should someone be prosecuted, prosecuting your political adversaries, but setting the political angle aside, just analyzing this case purely as a lawyer and as a prosecutor. And if you're trying to win a case, you need to anticipate your opponent's defenses. And one of the defenses is that he's going to run for office and he may win, and you may not be able to finish your case within that tight window. So when the January 6th committee has all this evidence. It's all been made public. Why do you wait more than a year to get an indictment? You know, in Fonnie Willis's case, I believe it was more than 2 years. Why do you charge 19 co-defendants to slow down your case? I mean, this is something that the special counsel should have anticipated, and I think he handled it poorly.
Yeah, very good. And I do want to ask you, because those are two federal cases, but you were here live on our air on Live Now from Fox when he was found guilty on those 34 counts in the state of New York. And of course, he can't pardon himself once he gets to the White House based on the fact that those are in the state of New York. But is there anything he can do, and what do we make of this? Because sentencing from that was expected to be just in about 20 or so days. What do we make of this?
The New York case is a lot more difficult for Trump. He does have some arguments with respect to the conviction. I think his best argument is going to be that there was evidence admitted in the New York hush money case that shouldn't have been in. It's not necessarily presidential immunity, but it relates to presidential immunity. This is why. If you read the majority opinion in that case, it was very broad. It said presidents are immune for official acts. But 5 of the 6 conservative justices, except Justice Barrett, said that even evidence of official acts cannot be admitted. So, what we're talking about here are Trump's communications with Hope Hicks, who was a campaign advisor, then, of course, became an official in the Trump White House, as well as Trump's tweets related to Michael Cohen. Should that evidence have come in the New York hush money case? If so, Trump may be granted a new trial or have the case dismissed entirely. So that's one argument. The second argument, of course, is that he's immune because he's president or president elect. A little bit more challenging because, again, the conduct took place primarily before he was president, when he was a candidate. And then Trump has a third argument, probably the weakest argument, is that the case should be removed to federal court. There is a federal law that says federal officials working in an official capacity are not supposed to be prosecuted in state court. That argument was rejected in Georgia. It was rejected in New York, but it's certainly an argument that Trump's lawyers will continue to make in that case.
All right, very good. I just wanted to break that down, as well as, do you think there's a delay in sentencing? And I want to ask you, could he serve time if he is obviously moving forward with this after his term in the White House? Is that a possibility?
Theoretically, yes. If there's a law school hypothetical, practically speaking, absolutely not. Even before Trump was elected yesterday evening, I thought there was no way Judge Juan Merchan was going to sentence a former president to any period of confinement. Certainly not incarceration, much less home confinement, just because logistically having Secret Service in Rikers Island or Trump Tower, it's just logistically impossible. Also, we're talking about Class E felonies under New York law, the least serious. Trump, of course, has no criminal history. Um, so under the totality of the circumstances, he was looking at a fine, probably, but a probation sentence at worst. And given all these legal arguments you have now that he's president elect, I fully expect either Trump's defense to prevail on appeal, and he has multiple appeals he can go through, because he can go through the New York state courts, which would be the appellate division of the Superior Court, then the Court of Appeal, which is the highest court in New York, and of course the U.S. Supreme Court, because it's a federal constitutional issue. But even if those appeals are unsuccessful, I think the sentence will be a no-time sentence. I'm almost certain of it, given the circumstances of this case.
All right, very good. Very interesting to learn, as I think a lot of people were thinking about this. And I do want to ask you, as a maybe theoretical question as a whole, because we saw the post there from Lindsey Graham talking about these politically motivated charges as well, and the complexion following a resounding win for Trump in this most recent election. Does this change anything moving forward with people, the DOJ, trying to charge former presidents of different criminal charges as well moving forward? Does that change anything in your eyes?
I think it does. It was always a hesitation for hundreds of years, decades, not to charge a former president. Obviously, Nixon was never charged. Bill Clinton was never charged. And it was really District Attorney Alvin Bragg in New York who was the first to sort of, go through that door. Obviously, Jack Smith followed suit, and then Fonnie Willis. But ultimately, nothing really came of these cases, whether it's the New York civil fraud case filed by Letitia James. Obviously, there's a judgment there. But I think it's going to be a slap on the wrist type sentence for Trump in the New York State case. Obviously, no resolution in the federal cases in the Georgia case. So I think this was a lot of time that was spent on this, and really we didn't get anywhere. I think once the impeachments failed in Congress, I think it was probably a sign in hindsight that this was not a case worth pursuing. It ended up being very divisive for the American people. And ultimately, I think they spoke last night that this was not a good decision made by prosecutors.
And I believe Trump said it outside of the courtroom that the really jury will be the voters in November, and they voted in a big way to elect him to return to the White House. All right, Neama Rahmani, thank you so much for breaking it all down. One of the many factors after this election day that we're following here on Live Now from Fox. Great talking to you as always.